Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Standard podcast seminar. Our guest today is Professor Paul Frijters, who is the Professor of Wellbeing Economics at the London School of Economics. He specializes in applied microeconometrics, including labor, happiness, and health economics. His main area of interest is analyzing how socioeconomic variables affect human life experience and the unanswerable economic mysteries in life. Professor Frijters is a prominent research economist and has published over 150 papers in fields including unemployment policy, discrimination, and economic development. But he joins us today to talk about his latest book, The Great Panic. I think Professor Frijters has provided an absolutely outstanding analysis of the topic of the Great Panic at a time when very few economists have asked the tough questions about the effectiveness and the economic consequences of the measures that have been carried out across the world. Professor Frijters has done some very important and I think interesting work on these economic impacts, and we're delighted to have him join us today. So, Professor Paul, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be on the show, Saifedian. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, close enough. Saifedian, yeah. It's I'm easy on pronunciation, doesn't matter much. Yeah, and in your book you discuss the madness of crowd. You have a long section on the madness of crowd. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you think of this phenomena of madness of crowds? What defines a crowd? Why they're crazy?
Yeah, so in our book we agonized over in terms of understanding what had happened and understanding it in some sense of what happened to the herd of humanity, and particularly then what happened within countries. And we noted a couple of things that happened in almost each of those countries, which you've already sketched somewhere, which is an unwillingness to look at what actually might be good for health, an unwillingness to even see what has been damage close by, a sort of an extreme focus on something very small, a willingness to engage in group crimes, which is, lock up the elderly, destroy the livelihoods of young people by not allowing them to go to school and socializing them, making lots of people lonely by just making it impossible for them to meet other people, closing down businesses and hence destroying their whole careers, all the things that they've worked for in life. And so then we came to the conclusion, okay, some sort of strange group phenomenon is going on here. And then we went back into the sociological literature of, a while back. So we thought of Gustave Le Bon, we sort of Elias Canetti, Adorno is sort of one of the big names. And there were many people who wrote on these kind of phenomena 50, 100 years ago, of course, partly after the Second World War, but also, 18th, 19th century people like Charles Mackay, who just saw whole villages going mad, as you said, but also of werewolves, they were afraid of vampires, witches, as you said, or trolls in the mountains, or, the doomsday was coming. And they analyzed those places as if indeed they went mad. And when we read those descriptions, it was kind of like, oh, that's exactly how it looks like, right? And so then we sort of distilled that for the modern age. And one of the things is that a quintessential aspect of the crowd is this obsession with something small, right? And in that obsession with something small, all the other stuff sort of loses its significance. It's as if the small thing to the group becomes enlarged as kind of this hugely important thing, and it crowds out care for their kids, it crowds out care for their own career. I mean, it crowds out care for jobs, for sort of long-term health and futures. It becomes this all-consuming obsession of a group, and that's one of the things, right? And the second thing that then happens is that group, as it were, it loses its empathy. It loses, as it were, a fixed moral compass and becomes totally fluid, both in terms of truth, because everything starts to, come together in terms of what can we do about this obsession? How can we get what we obsess about? But that also filters through to morality. So good and bad start to sort of lose its meaning over time and start to be about, good is controlling this, or, solving this obsession in some sense, and bad is not doing that, right? So everything else that used to be good or bad before, or that will be good or bad again in 10 years' time, sort of fade away almost as moral constructs, and people sort of then start to look weirdly. And with that, hence, comes this willingness to, as a group, become criminals, truly cause the deaths of millions of people. And of course, we've seen this during panic as well. Inside countries, what we've done to our own children, what we've done to lonely people, what we've done to people in nursing homes, what we've done to people in hospitals is just awful. The destruction has been on a totally different magnitude. And look at what the disruption of trade, what the disruption of sort of normal social interaction has done in poor parts of the world where they don't have all the extras that we have. If we impoverish ourselves and become only half as rich as we were, we'll still be fine. But that's not true in India. That's not true in the slums there. You look at people there in 3 weeks, well, they've got no food. They're just going to die out of hunger, right? And of course, that happens.
From your studies, how do people snap out of this? Like, how does the village eventually, or does the village eventually ever come to terms with the fact that, this old lady we burnt was just an old lady and maybe we should stop burning old ladies? Or, do just the people who burned her die and their kids forget about it and then 2 generations later they burn another one?
Well, it's more the latter one. So there are various ways in which a crowd comes to an end, right? So one is that if the crowd misbehaves too much and makes too much of a nuisance to other people, so that could be a neighboring village, it could be a neighboring country whom they invade, but in some ways, start a large war, which means there's a huge counter reaction and they get conquered, then the conqueror sorts it out. The conqueror basically takes the leaders, shoots them, hangs them, or in some way makes an example of them, and then just floods the media of the conquered country with counter propaganda. So we've seen.
Well, that's
this
a happy
Japan.
ending of sorts.
That's
I
a
guess.
reasonable happy ending, but after a devastating war. So that was Nazi Germany, but that was also Japan, right? And that's many instances also of villages which were snapped out of it by just, as it were, authorities coming into the village and say, right, you guys have gone so mad on this vampire stuff. You've created so much trouble in the neighborhood. We're just going to go in here. We're going to, hang the head man of the office, and we are going to bombard you every week with sermons as to how there are no vampires, right? And so that's one way. Basically, the group makes such, as it were, damage and damages the interests of others that they come in and sort it out. Now, that, of course, only happens if you really make a nuisance of things, because you are then forcing others to go and fight you and conquer you, right? And then try and sort you out. So another way in which the madness of crowds comes to an end is that the crowd gradually loses interest. Because you can obsess about vampires, but come on, I mean, you also want a career, you want to get married, you might want to travel. I mean, there are other things to worry about than these bloody vampires in the neighborhood. And the same thing, of course, for the prohibition, the same thing for people who were Puritans or socialists. People don't just care about one thing. So that obsession sort of starts to fizzle out at the edges of the crowd. But it doesn't happen in the big bang. There's no sort of moment of revelation of, oh, we were wrong. It doesn't usually happen that way unless someone forces them into that. So it is more that other concerns come in. So it fades. That's what happens. But the fading can take a long time. It can take years.